prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick on board Reality 1, 22,000 miles north of your toque. Today's episode is brought to you by the letter M. Maintenant, Nancy.
Rising anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has voted the English-only sign 40,000 tons of bomb with PCBs blew up the ozone layer today.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
The letter M is for mail call. People have been faxing me up their thoughts, and my friend Control zapped me up some video mail. So these pirate broadcasts are getting through to people who care. For my creditors, let's see. Dear Commander Rick, how about a show dealing with self-publishing your own comic book or fanzine? I'm working on it. The use of many short interview bites creates more confusion than cohesion. I must have seen Frank Miller in the last 3 or 4 shows, and I still don't feel like I know the guy any better. Well, hey, I'm not doing the Friars Club celebrity roast here. City TV's movie and fashion TV magazine shows would serve as better format models? What, Orbit TV? Do I look like Erica M? I'm not doing Overstreet's the movie. You want celebrity profiles, read Comics Interview magazine. I'm here to talk about the big issues, which is what science fiction and comics are doing, and they still don't get no respect. Now, in mainstream literature, Danielle Steele outsells Margaret Atwood, but Margaret Atwood gets respect. People have at least heard of her. Ask the man on the street about comics, and all they know are the mutated ninja reptiles. Who's ever heard of Moebius? And yeah, people have heard of Steven Spielberg, but who knows about Judith Merril? Yeah, fans know, but that's 0.001% of the world. Moebius and Merrill have helped raise comic books and fantasy and science fiction to the level of art, and no one knows about it. Well, that's where I come in. So forget about M for male. Today, the letter M stands for Moebius and Merrill and me. Now, in Europe, Jean Giraud, a.k.a. Moebius, is a respected artist and storyteller. His work hangs in galleries, his art commands top dollar, and he sold millions of comics. In America, people think Moebius is an oil company.
He brings a level of craft that is utterly astonishing to the work. And on top of that, his work at its best is the work of an absolutely free spirit. It's unrestrained by social convention. It's unrestrained by censorship or by whoever else is in the room or by fads, common wisdom. It's the work of a pure visionary talent.
Jean grew up in France reading Tintin and Flash Gordon comics. Both influenced his work. In the 1950s, he began drawing Western comics. In the 1970s, he started exploring science fiction comics, and along the way, he's drawn posters, paintings, and book covers. Moebius, it's Commander Rick. You've been called a visionary and a genius. Why did you choose to work in comics?
I think I had no choice. I had no choice. It was that or nothing, or something. When I see the alternative, it's dark and confused. Anything could happen. The only thing very clear for me, the only path very sure was to draw. And inside the drawing field, it was comics.
Did you draw as a child?
Yeah, I had problems. I thought I was not beloved the way I deserved, you know. I had the feeling to be rejected a little bit. And the adults around me had not the attention to me I wanted to have. And I think all the small children has the same feeling. And once I did a drawing, and everybody was very happy, and look at that, it's beautiful, this child is a genius. And I had my way, because I had the power to take the attention of the adults. It could have been singing, so I could be a singer or anything else, but it was drawing. So.
After 30 years, your reasons must have changed. What keeps you at it now?
To be a professional who wake in the morning with a nice program in the day. Nothing boring, nothing painful, and nothing against myself or against anybody. So the pleasure, it's a pleasure to tell a story, to build a story. I follow that pleasure.
I've always liked Moebius's work. Perhaps one reason because he has so many different styles. He was equally at home with drawing a traditional comic strip like Lieutenant Blueberry is the Western that he does. And he does it in a straight traditional style, very clear storytelling. You always know what's going on. And he also has a science fiction side, which isn't necessarily devoted to clarity. Sometimes you haven't a clue as to what's going on. And I like the range that he gets in his work, as well as a technical facility that is truly remarkable.
Jean signed his artwork in Lieutenant Blueberry as Giraud. In 1973, he did a story in Pilote magazine called The Detour. It was the first time that he signed his work Moebius and the first time he tried science fiction, and he stuck with both ever since. For those of you who slept through math, a Moebius strip is a piece of paper with only one side. You take a strip of paper, put a half twist in it, and you'll find that if you start drawing on one side, you end up drawing on both sides because there only is one side. And yet Moebius's artwork is multi-sided, resonant, multi-dimensional, and, oh, sorry. Moebius, you've collaborated with a lot of people over the years, but your most ambitious collaborations have been with Alejandro Jodorowsky.
He is one of the men who helped me to find more truth and peace in myself. And, you know, sometimes people help you to do that. Sometimes you find the help in a book or in a philosophy or a religion. Me too sometimes, but I found that person. I was very lucky.
Well, I love Moebius and I love Giraud. Alejandro Jodorowsky writing. And I have worked with Jodorowsky in Mexico for many years. And we did pantomime together. He's a master, pantomime master. And he's an incredible writer. So his writing, and combined with Giraud's artwork, is going to be spectacular. And if they have involvement with a movie, it's going to be something else.
Ah, yes, Moebius did pre-production designs for Alien, Tron, Willow, and finally a movie with 2 words in the title, The Abyss. So when someone says, gee, where did they get all those neat ideas? The answer is Moebius. Moebius and Jodorowsky worked for 9 months on Dune, and then Jodorowsky was replaced by David Lynch as director, and all their work was thrown out. No wonder the movie stunk.
In the wreckage of Dune, Jodorowsky approached Moebius with a story he had written in Mexico and said, would you like to illustrate this? And the story was The Eyes of the Cat. It's a 50-page narrative with 1 panel per page, and it sets up a very careful and a very engaging rhythm for the reader. It's a story about 2 artists searching for a new way of seeing, and they're using the metaphor of this eyeless child who is sending out this bird to collect a means of seeing for it.
Jean, if Eyes of the Cat is a metaphor, what were you and Jodorowsky trying to say?
I don't know. You know, when we do stories, we don't know what we do. And the only thing Alessandro told me is very strange. When it was finished, he said, okay, this is the first part. We will do the second part another time. And he said that the second part is much more, it gives the explanation. So we will wait maybe again 2 or 10 years to finish, to know the end of the story. And to know the meaning of the story.
Sounds like Twin Peaks. After Eyes of the Cat, Moebius and Jodorowsky started a project that would make Dune look like a backup story in an Archie comic. It was the Incal. This violent, high-tech future religious detective story is full of exotic anamorphic characters, imaginative settings, and a wildly original story. The Incal is so deep, it's huge. Jean, were you happy with the Incal?
Oh yes, it's great saga. And I'm always happy with everything I did, because I choose to be happy. You know, I'm not completely satisfied. But I'm not completely satisfied, but I'm still happy.
You started drawing Westerns with Frank and Jeremy, and you're still doing Lieutenant Blueberry. How did you get into science fiction? I mean, what do Westerns and science fiction have in common, except Star Trek?
Again, I follow my pleasure. When I was a teenager, I was a great fan of Western. It was, for me, the ultimate dream. And I discovered science fiction a little bit later, when I was 16, 17. And in that time in Europe, it was a style of literature very hidden, you know, not very popular. But it was new, they had new ideas, and it was a new vision of mankind, of destiny of race. I remember it's my father who showed me science fiction. And once, I remember he called me and he said, "Did you know do you know what's happening?" And I said, "No, the Russian, they send a man into the stars. It's incredible." It was Gagarin. And he told me, "We are now into science fiction."
Moebius views all people as equal, all people as valuable. Maybe that's why his comics, unlike the superheroes, are popular with women. Nancy, give me a line to San Francisco. Trina Robbins, it's Commander Rick. You called Will Eisner the great communicator. What about Moebius?
If Eisner is the great communicator, Moebius is the saint. You know? I mean, of course he's wonderful. You're asking me about people who are so obviously wonderful that there really isn't anything I can say about them except they're wonderful. I mean, this man, you know, this man someday is simply going to levitate and, you know, and we'll lose him.
But Trina, both Eisner and Moebius have very small audiences.
Well, of course their audiences are small. They don't draw up overly muscled guys with tiny little pinheads beating each other up, you know. They're for intelligent people.
Yeah.
Possibly their audiences are small because there is a very small group of intelligent people in this world. Certainly in the United States of America.
In a way, you come to see me and you see me as a comic artist, but I see me as somebody with a lot of things to do, to think, and to like you. I'm a normal human being. And my work, my profession is, okay, it's big, but it's not all my life.
And yet, your work has had a profound effect amongst your readers and your peers. Other comic creators have told me that your work has transformed them.
I'm interested in transformation. I'm growing up. So it's normal if if they are transformed by, if some people are transformed by my works. It's a little bit the purpose of my energy, transformation.
Thanks, Sean. Transformation, change, growth, science fiction. If Moebius is a key figure in transforming comics into an art form, then Judith Merril was pivotal in pushing science fiction to mature. Judith started out writing pulp fiction.
I read science fiction. I liked it very much. I did not think I was competent to write it. I had learned to write pulp stories, mystery and Western and sports. But those were mechanical things. They had standard formulas, they had plots. Once you learned to do one, you could do a million. It was simple, but science fiction, fortunately, was not like that. You had to be working all the time.
Judith hung out with the Futurians, a group of New York science fiction fans who wanted to become writers, and a surprising number of them did. Isaac Asimov, James Blish, Cyril Kornbluth, Donald Wollheim, Frederick Pohl. And although Judith didn't feel qualified to write SF, a lot of the writers, including Theodore Sturgeon, kept urging her to try.
There's a story I've told quite often, which I'll try to do quickly. I like telling it slowly. I was leaving Ted's one evening, and he came out on the landing and started in again and said, "You really need to try a science fiction story." And I said, "Ted, it just doesn't, He said, look at the wall over there. Look at the little green man running up the wall. Look, he has a long, pointed hat, and it's sticking straight out, and he's running fast, little steps up the wall. I said, nah, I don't see any little green man running up the wall. I said, come on, look again, look. I said, Ted, I not only don't see any little green man running up the wall, but if I did, he would be taking long, dragging steps, and his hat would be hanging down. He said, right. I write fantasy, you write science fiction. Go home and write it. And the extraordinary thing is that on that occasion I did. I went home and wrote my first story.
Possibly the single most important thing Judy Merril did is represent the voice of the wider world within the science fiction's fairly incestuous community in the 1950s. There was a major split in that period between the science fiction writers who took the view that it was just fine to write badly. All they were doing was writing a fiction of ideas, that they were writing for each other, that there was a kind of us against the world, insularity that was operating as probably the larger voice in science fiction at that time. Judy Merril was at the center, at the forefront of almost a schism group that said, that's lazy, that's limited. Science fiction has a responsibility to be written as well as the best mainstream writing is, to explore character and theme and motif as aggressively and embracingly as the best mainstream does, and to seize the advantages of science fiction, the power of the genre, to work with those characters and themes and motifs in a new and inventive way.
Judith was one of the first women writers in a genre that was desperate for a woman's perspective.
Indeed, at every step along the way, not only was I invited, not only was I urged, but specifically the field felt itself, understood itself to be in need of women. I was getting stories rejected after that first one from time to time with notes from editors saying, but what we want is the woman's point of view.
Her first sale was That Only a Mother. In a future filled with radiation, a woman fears that her baby will be born, like so many others, a mutation. Her husband is away working, cleaning up atomic waste, and he misses the birth. She writes and tells him how beautiful the baby is. When he returns, he discovers that the baby is really a limbless mutation, and his wife has gone mad denying it. Judith was writing powerful, moving stories, and yet she's best remembered as a writer for two rather uninspired novels, Gunner Cade and Outpost Mars, which she banged off with C.M. Kornbluth.
We wrote Gunner Cade in 6 weeks, which was 3 weeks longer than we meant to take. I mean, we were desperate, we were broke, we were rock bottom, and we had to make some money, which was the only reason we wrote such a derivative, more than derivative. I mean, we studied Heinlein and Leiber in their novels of that type carefully, and then modeled this with some new stuff and wrote it and said what we wanted was something that would sell to Campbell. Campbell bought it instantly as soon as he saw it. It was a great success. The embarrassing thing is that of all the work I have ever published, Gunner Cade is the only thing that has never yet been out of print. So I don't know whether this is embarrassing about the readers, about the publishers, or about my view of what's worth writing or what's good when it's done, or the motivations writers have for, but it's embarrassing for whatever reason.
But Judith's greatest impact on science fiction is her influence on other writers, as a critic and as an editor of anthologies. Perhaps her most important anthology is England Swings. This collection of experimental British science fiction had as big an impact on North American science fiction as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones had on North American music. In England Swings, Judith introduced North America to the new wave, a whole slew of angry, outrageous, controversial, dangerous British writers. In all of these collections, Judith is credited as an editor, but a better term might be anthologizer.
Although I wasn't aware of it the first few years I was doing it, I began to realize afterwards that in a way for me, putting together an anthology was writing a book. I was using other people's material. It was more like a montage than like simply a selection of these are very good stories, or the very good stories that I happen to be able to get. I would go out and fight tooth and nail for certain stories because they said what I thought needed to be said.
Hey, that's what I'm doing. I'm an anthologizer like Judith Merril. Where's that letter? Forget this endless one-sided criticism. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. And so do I. And so does Judith. She's still editing anthologies. When Press Porcepique wanted to do an anthology of Canadian science fiction and fantasy, they called Judith.
The material was there. The people at Press Porcepique suspected it. I felt sure of it. But it needed a name. You know, the golden phrase, a name. It needed a name to get people to look at it and say, oh yeah, there it is. So I go around being a name.
And being a resident of Canada. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, in 1968, Judith was passing through Toronto and she decided to stay.
I had reached a point where I was not willing to be an American any longer. It was during the Vietnam War, but it was not only the Vietnam War. I had been alienated increasingly for 30 years or so by what I perceived of what the goals and means of the country of which I was a citizen were.
Oh, hang on, it continues on this tape here.
I went to the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968. My daughter and some of her friends were working for McCarthy and asked me if I would drive them out, and I said yes. I think maybe in Chicago I will be able to make a decision about what I'm doing. So we went, and I did. I didn't know I was starting to make the decision when, at the end, in disgust and horror, I said, what do you say we cross the border at Detroit and drive home via Toronto? And it was the year that Rochdale was starting. And suddenly there was a place to go where not only was I not simply escaping to the sort of never land that England was at the time, but this was where the guys who had to leave the country were going.
Rochdale was a University of Toronto residence that was turned into an experimental free university by the students. Very 60s, very open. Judith moved into Rochdale with her huge collection of books.
Well, I came with this whole science fiction collection, which I really didn't know why I brought with me, except that it had happened over the years while I was doing all these things. And it was sort of like if you have a 16-year-old dog and you're changing countries, what do? You either have to have the dog put away or you have to take it with you because it's too old to change homes. And I brought the books with me. And then we ran out of education money there, and there was no one to take care of the library. So a lot of the books I just left there, but the science fiction books I pulled out when I left the building. And then Harry Campbell, who was then the chief librarian in Toronto, and who had been very helpful and interested when we started the library in Rochdale, came around to see me and said, I hear you're trying to sell your collection. And I said, yeah, you know a buyer? He said, no, but you could give them to us. And if you give them to us, we will start a special science fiction and fantasy branch. And then you will still have access to all the books, but we'll take care of them. Right. So that's what happened.
The Spaced Out Library opens in 1970 and goes on to become one of the largest collections of science fiction and fantasy in the world. And on January 1st, 1991, the name officially changes to the Merrill Collection of Science Fiction, Speculation, and Fantasy.
I did eventually decide, after seeing the other names they had up for sale, that it would be better to let them use mine, which is what they're going to do. But in the course of my agonized self-appraisal in changing my mind, what I realized was that I am almost more of an icon than a human being at this point. And so all my responses to what I want to do or what I might do or what I think of myself, I keep remembering that all I really am is a symbol up on the arch over the door.
Judith Merril is not an icon, she's a force. She champions science fiction as literature. She encourages and promotes writers in the best possible way by publishing them so their voices are heard. I'm losing this channel, they're trying to cut me off. Listen, I know you want to hear from comic book creators and science fiction writers, but they'd be the first to tell you that what's important is the art, not the artist. And it is art. Judith Merril knows that. Moebius knows that. I know that. Now you know that. Tell 3 friends. I mean, I'm sorry for yelling at you, Mr. I'm sick of the Commander Rick character. What? Next week on Second Nature, the defense of North America. Our atomic bombs are too terrible to ever use, and our conventional weapons are too terrible to ever work. Also, what exactly is haggis?